Hello and welcome to the first lesson in this 12-part study of the Book of Colossians. Now for this first lesson, you will be studying the Book of Acts chapter 15, and that might seem a little counterintuitive at first. Why study the Book of Acts when this is a study of Colossians? Well, books like Colossians, which are most of the later books of the New Testament, are what are known as epistles or letters, and they're a distinctly different genre of writing than the style of writing that you see in the Book of Acts, for example. The Book of Acts is a narrative book. It is a story. It is one of the last narrative books of the New Testament. And a good interpretation of the letters, like Colossians, relies on the reader having some kind of familiarity with the narrative of the Bible. And so it really pays off to have a grasp of what is going on in the world of the first century as told in the Book of Acts before you jump into these later letters of the New Testament. It's sort of like trying to watch a movie by jumping into the second half of the film without having seen the previous half and trying to understand what's going on. You're just really going to struggle to gather the details or the points being made in the narrative. So it really helps to have an understanding of what is going on in the Book of Acts before you get into the letters of the New Testament, like Colossians. So specifically why Acts chapter 15 is important has to do with the first major conflict that erupts in the church. And what you will see as you continue studying through the New Testament is that this debate that occurs in Acts chapter 15 is pretty much the debate in almost every epistle that you're going to read, especially those that this individual named Paul wrote. This debate was all over the ancient world, at least in the context of the church, which is the addressee of these letters, just in different locations. Colossians being written to the church at Colossae, Ephesians being written to the church at Ephesus, and so on and so forth. So, specifically in Acts chapter 15, the conflict that erupts has everything to do with this concept of the Old Testament law being applied to these New Testament Gentile believers. Now, if you don't know anything about the Old Testament law, again, you're sort of left playing catch up. The Old Testament was the law book of ancient Israel, so to speak. It was the rule book. It was the Ten Commandments in Exodus and so on and so forth, all the way through to Deuteronomy, where God gave laws and rules to the nation of Israel for the purpose of separating them from the Gentiles, to make them a light unto the other nations. And after years and years of misconstrual and missing the point of why that was given, which becomes a crucial point in some of Paul's letters, it had kind of gotten to a point where this group known as the Pharisees were very stringent, what we might call legalists, who essentially believed that one's righteousness came as a result of the degree to which they kept and obeyed the law. In other words, righteousness was earned through law keeping. And what Paul and these other New Testament writers often wrote to show them and the Gentiles was that righteousness never came from obedience to the law, but righteousness is imputed to them from Christ through faith. That is how righteousness is attained. And it becomes a major fight in the early church when these teachers from Israel go into the Gentile churches and begin teaching them that righteousness is earned through law keeping, in contrast to what Paul and these other apostles have already taught them concerning Christ. So it's a very interesting situation where the people who are going into the churches are not unbelievers. They are what we would call Judaizers. They are Jews who became Christians, but seek to hold the law and grace, as Paul calls it, this new dispensation of grace, in tension. They want to believe in Jesus, but they want the Gentiles to adopt the practices of the law before they are considered true Christians. And so they're going into the churches and they're teaching these things, and it creates a whole conflict where the Gentiles basically tell Paul and Barnabas and others, before you go any further, go back to Jerusalem and sort out this whole mess about the law. Because until you can give us a clear answer on what we are supposed to do, it's just getting too confusing. So Paul and the other apostles all go back to Jerusalem and initiate what is known as the Jerusalem Council. And the topic of debate is, do the Gentiles have to adopt the practice of circumcision and the law, the practices of the law, before they can be considered true Christians? And the answer everyone sort of comes up with is no, that's not the case. And so Paul and these other apostles begin sending out these letters to the churches addressing this particular topic, and basically telling the Gentiles that's not the case. You will find as you read the epistles that these Judaizers do not go away. They tend to be the biggest problem in the early church, telling the Gentiles that they have to adopt the practices of the law. Now, where many of your modern interpreters have a tendency to go when they read books like Colossians is they'll say, so Colossians addresses the issue of legalism in the church. Well, not necessarily. It's not so much addressing the issue of legalism in the church as it is addressing the problem of the Judaizers. And it's not that legalism is just another issue being talked about. That is what prompts the writing of the letter in the first place. The whole reason for letters like Colossians and Ephesians, among others, Romans especially, is that these Judaizers are in the churches instigating these kinds of problems. And so everything in the letter is not, hitting all of these theological topics that you then come over here and address this side issue of legalism. It's not an, oh, by the way. This is the issue in a very specific and tight context. And you get that context when you read the book of Acts, especially when you read the book of Acts chapter 15. So that is why before we even begin the study of Colossians, it's a good idea to have some kind of familiarity with what is going on in the first century church. What are some of the biggest issues that the church is facing at the time? And as you go through Colossians, I think it's going to become quite clear that Paul is very much addressing these same issues that were discussed in Acts chapter 15.